welcome everyone to our science panel with a very big question: will science secure or upend the world order? And science has, of course, shaped the geopolitical and geosecurity discourse for decades. Yet science actually very rarely has a front row seat. So allow me to just add one more sentence of introductions to our wonderful panelists here. So we have Dr. Archana Sharma. She is a lead scientist and physicist, of course, at CERN. But very importantly, she is also the recipient of the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman Award, which is, of course, India's highest honor for Indians living abroad. So very warm welcome and thank you. Dr. Philippa Lensos is, of course, an internationally recognized expert in biosecurity. She is a professor at King's College in both the Department of War Studies, which I'm sure many are familiar with, but also the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine. And very importantly, she also chairs the WHO Technical Advisory Group on the responsible use of life sciences and dual-use research, which we're going to touch upon in a moment. And Dr. James Beecham, as was mentioned earlier, some of you already had the pleasure of listening to his presentation yesterday, also a brilliant particle physicist at CERN. Very briefly, my name is Karina Hoyer from World Minds. So our organization connects brilliant minds and wonderful minds like these scientists with leaders from the worlds of business and politics or geopolitics like yourselves. So James, actually, let's dive right in. So what is the role of CERN and why should we seek to understand the origins of the universe?
That's a pretty big question. Well, so the first part is that what is CERN? So part of the reason why at least two of us are here is that we work at this place called CERN. A lot of you may have visited because maybe you've spent some time in Geneva for various reasons, but CERN is this enormous particle physics laboratory. It's a physics laboratory, and it was founded in the late 50s, early 60s by a coalition of scientists, primarily from around Europe. That's the E part in CERN. But the intention was to, primarily to help to give one way for Europe to heal after World War II, after the horrors of World War II, because as we know, especially with the success of the movie Oppenheimer, it's in the news or in the kind of cultural consciousness again. There were some very terrible things that happened with the N in CERN, which was nuclear. And so this was the intention to bring scientists together to have a laboratory that had an explicit purpose that was science for peace. It was really basic science, fundamental science for peaceful purposes, for the public good. And by charter, no military funding, no military applications whatsoever, not even necessarily an intention to do, say, energy sources or anything like that, non-commercial science for the public good. So that was the intention. And the E part, of course, indicated Europe, and it sort of had that focus for a very long time, still does in its structure. It has a kind of member state structure, an intergovernmental organization with 23 member states and then a large number of other either non-member states or associate members, things like that. For example, India, Japan, the United States, huge percentage of person power and resources come from these nations, but they're not technically member states of CERN. And over time, of course, the N part, the nuclear part, has evolved a bit, because back in the day, nuclear was sort of like the smallest thing that you could think of. Not really, of course, we knew about smaller things, but that was the sort of focus of physics back then. Over time, we don't really do any nuclear physics now anymore. A little bit, you could say that some of it is a little bit nuclear, but not in the sense that you think of in terms of bombs or power plants. It's really just simply to understand, as Corinna pointed out, the origin of everything in the universe is like basically to understand the fundamental building blocks of the universe and how they fit together in rather startling and complex and fascinating ways to build the universe that we have now. And this is an enormously fascinating, wonderful set of research that we do. And to answer the second part of your question, why do we do this at all? Well, I think for me, and I think for you, the answer is in the question itself. Like, who in their lives has never at some point not thought to themselves any of the following three things? Where did everything come from? How does everything work around us at its smallest possible fundamental scales? And where are we going? Those are the three questions that behind the scenes we're all trying to answer at CERN. Of course, the specific things that we're studying get a bit more complex, right? The Higgs boson particle, quantum black holes, heavy neutral leptons. This is the wheelhouse of more complex, graduate school classes and popular level books you can read. But really, behind the scenes, those are the kinds of questions that we're trying to answer, the very, very basic ones. And as a result of that, this kind of research has a very sort of unique role to play in the world, in the world scientific community, because again, it's strictly, thousands of people come from around the globe to work on site at this facility strictly because we're curious about the universe. Yes, there are always, practical applications, and I think, the other people can talk about this, but really the focus, the point of this research is excitable nerds like me want to know more about the universe.
James, thank you so much. And of course, to build on that, yes, we want to understand the universe, but Archana, maybe a question for you. I'm sure you often get asked still, so what? But there is, of course, a lot of technology that is spun out of CERN. There's a lot of value of the study of particle physics when it comes to technological advancements. Could you name a few, and how does that process work?
Thank you for the question. Now, like my colleague James just said, that we are looking at why, how. The question is now, this big laboratory, the largest particle physics laboratory on the planet, also hosts the largest physical apparatus of the planet, that is the Large Hadron Collider, or the Big Bang machine. And that's where we had found the Higgs boson that you heard as well. Now, why? That is, we did not look for giving the World Wide Web. And how did that happen? Because huge amount of data needed to be shared between the physicists. And there was Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who was a young student at CERN in the late 80s, who proposed the World Wide Web as a means of sharing information. And the web has completely transformed the world. I think that is one thing that every one of you can relate to, that without the www or the FTTP, we are unable to go through our day. Economies have completely changed. We are more than 1 trillion of economy every single day that goes through the web. And we also have the many, many other technologies that come as a spin-off from the physics that we do without actually looking for those spin-offs. We are working on curiosity. However, initially, the World Wide Web was completely given free to the world in 1993. And, if we had patented it for 1 cent each click, today we would have had all the money for the collider around the moon. But unfortunately, scientists are very poor financials, So nevertheless, we have picked that up a bit, but that big idea has still to come again. Then we have all the medical devices, medical technologies, imaging, just like we look through the detectors for the collisions, in the same way, we look through our bodies for imaging of cancers, imaging of tumors and other difficult diseases, securities at the airport, then, of course, the simulations that are needed for drug discovery, for computations of weather forecasting that need heavy models. All that has been possible because of the LHC grid that also has been the precursor of the cloud. And so on. I can go on, and these discoveries have been from the 70s onwards. And I would say that it is an amazing vision that CERN and its management, coming from all over the globe now, in fact, because most leaders of particle physics come from the whole world, we have vision of something like 40 years. I have seen spreadsheets of the operations of the Large Hadron Collider up to 2041, and we still do not have the technologies that we will use for the next collider. But those are the technologies that were thought of 20 years ago and today are used in medical resonance imaging, and so on. Yes.
Thank you. So a question to build on that. I mean, CERN is, of course, the largest social and scientific experiment ever conducted in history. But the technologies that are spun out, I mean, what is is there a danger for those technologies to be used in a military capacity? Are there checks and balances in place? How do you keep an oversight over the technologies that are spun out?
Certainly, I mean, scientists are doing their science driven by curiosity and passion. Now, it is like the knife in the hands of the surgeon and the fire in the kitchen. So the scientists produce technologies, and it's the user's responsibilities. It's the responsibility of the system, and not, so it's the science and the system that has to come together when we have to mitigate the risks of science and hence technology. So systems need to be adept, flexible enough in time, because the pace of acceleration of technologies into the society is like holding a tiger by the tail. It's very hard to really keep in step with those developments. So policies, systems, and of course, a big seat for science in dialogues like these is very important.
Thank you. James, did you want to add something to this?
I mean, I guess just to emphasize what was being said here, and again, the thing to keep in mind that the things that I'm interested in as a scientist, as a physicist, right, are the things that are the kind of fundamental questions, right? And again, those fundamental questions, the role that they play in society are similar to, like we said, philosophical questions about what is our role, what is humanity's role in the universe, what are we, but also the kind of similar role in a sense to that a Picasso painting plays, right? It's like, why do we, someone asked the question, why do we give public money to a museum to guard a Picasso or a Juan Miro painting? It's because these kinds of things compel us to see the universe in a new way and recontextualize, hopefully in a good way, our human existence. And so the things that I'm interested in are like, what is the Higgs boson particle? What is dark matter? What are quantum black holes? These are the things that I'm interested in. And those things cannot be commercialized. They cannot be weaponized. The Higgs boson is not weaponizable. It lives for 10 to the power minus 23 seconds. You'll never be able to do anything of it. The technologies that are spun out, though, like Archana says, those primarily, I think it's going to be hard to say that those are going to have very particular usages in, for nefarious purposes. But as she said, there's only so much you can do. I mean, the World Wide Web, again, was invented so that particle physics nerds could better share data around the globe. And now you can use it to watch cat videos around the globe, also make rude comments on people's photos, but also you can use it to organize terrorist activities, right? I mean, this is something that you can't really control.
Absolutely, which leads us to biosecurity. Clearly, one of the very important questions that everyone should be looking into is, well, first of all, there's a lot of defensive, let's say, biosecurity or bioweapons programs that we know of. There is not so much information about offensive bioweapons programs. We have an expert here for biosecurity. Philippa, what are the biggest risks you currently see within your field?
Thank you, Corinna, and hello, everybody. Nice to have you with us. We've heard a great deal about physics and all the wonderful things that physics does. Biology, too, does pretty cool stuff. But that's not what Corinna asked me about. She asked me about the dark side of biology and of science. And there is a dark side. There is a way in which we can deliberately use science to harm people and animals and the world around us that we need to pay attention to. And physicists have been doing that for quite some time. James, you mentioned the film Oppenheimer. I'm sure many of you have seen it. It's been in the news regularly the past few weeks with all the awards it's been getting. That was really a movie about the difficulties and moral and ethical dilemmas that scientists grapple with when their science hit the social context, the political world. And just because of the way in which physicists have had their science been misused as weaponry, physicists are generally very aware of the potential negative sides of their science. Chemists, too, saw their science misused during World War I. You will all know about the gas clouds over the trenches in Europe at that time. So physicists, chemists too, have had this awareness of the negative aspects of their science. But biologists don't tend to have this sensitivity that there is a security dimension to their work. And that's not because there hasn't been misuse of their science. The 20th century saw several countries develop offensive biological weapons programs, some very sophisticated, others less sophisticated, but there has been an intention to also misuse the science. The good news, we have something called the Biological Weapons Convention, which is an international treaty completely prohibiting biological weapons, to which most countries in the world are signed up, and it's been going strong for nearly 50 years now. The concern now, which is what you were alluding to, Corinna, was really that the world is changing. The science is advancing very rapidly. It's enabling us to do things now. Think of genomics, think of synthetic biology, think of the sorts of genetic manipulations that are now currently being enabled by words like CRISPR, which you will have heard of, etc. So there's new things that the science is now enabling, and the concern is that these kinds of advances might give you an edge if you want to deliberately cause harm. And so in the current political climate, in the international heightened tension environment, the dark side of biology is something we definitely need to pay more attention to.
Absolutely. And so talk to us a little bit more about disinformation and how disinformation, which is unfortunately a trend that we've also been seeing over the last couple of years, but specifically recently, is impacting biosecurity and the risks.
Sure. I mean, there are several aspects of the science that are that we need to pay attention to. The intersection between AI and biology, for example, is raising a lot of question. There was a wonderful panel on this at lunchtime already, on AI specifically. Disinformation, which is what you were asking about, Corinna, is another sort of area that is very much shaping the biological threats that we see. You will all be conscious of the COVID pandemic we just had, and some countries are still very much facing. There was a lot of misinformation around at that time. The WHO Secretary General or Director General said, we're facing an infodemic, not just a pandemic, but also an infodemic. There's so much information accompanying this, and so much of that is misinformation. Alongside that is also disinformation, where you have deliberate campaigns to try to spread confusion and uncertainty. We're likely to see more of that in disease outbreaks in the future. And I think the intersection there between the potential misuse of biology coupled with disinformation is going to leave people very confused, unsure what the truth is. And that is something that strikes, I think, at the core of science. Science is about truth finding. It's about knowledge production. And disinformation, which was referenced several times in the inaugural speech yesterday, strikes at the heart of our information systems and our ways of understanding the world. We will potentially, by the end, be unsure of what is true and what is false. And there's a lot of things coming together, which is making that a reality. And I think the role of science really needs to be, we all need to be supportive of science to make sure that is held up as the way in which we know what's true in the world and the fundament of our democracies. Thank you.
And so last question on that. You mentioned, I mean, there's dual-use research. That's a big risk of dual-use research. biologists somewhat being a little unaware of the potential harmful use of what they do. I mean, what kind of international collaboration or collaborative efforts on the one hand are needed, but also on the other side, I mean, who should take the lead? How can we ensure a bit more oversight to manage these risks?
I mean, biological risks are becoming increasingly complex, increasingly challenging. It's too big for one organization, one country, one sector to take the lead. It requires, like all of science actually, collaboration. And that collaboration has got to be cross-national, it's got to be cross-disciplinary, it's got to be cross-institutional. So we have got to develop a patchwork, I think, of response mechanisms and institutions that are involved in order to address some of these very large questions.
Yeah. So talking about international collaboration, Archana, a question for you. When looking at CERN, and CERN obviously being one of the success stories of international collaboration when it comes to scientific endeavors, where and how do you see science taking the leads or a lead in international relation building, in international diplomacy, and building that very important bridge?
Thank you for the question, Corina. In fact, it is indeed exemplary, I would say, that CERN is a prime example of science diplomacy in action. We have not been able to speak about it, but we just do it from the time we started in 1954. Like James said, you know, Europe came together after the Second World War for peace. People or countries that were fighting with each other came together and they worked together to build what is today CERN. And after 7 decades, CERN is here as a demonstration of trust, as a demonstration of fair practices, sharing data, risk mitigation, resource management, and cost-effective experimentation on a very large scale. You know, I belong to a collaboration which is 6,000 scientists. And James belongs to another competitive experiment that has another 6,000 scientists, engineers, and technicians. But we work together. We are in collaboration because together we announced the Higgs boson to the world. So there is so much trust which comes from porous borders of countries where national interests are strategized in such a way that they are aligned with the scientists' interests. So when we talk of systems and when we talk of science diplomacy, we need to now move a little bit aside from the theoretical aspects of science diplomacy, but rather pick up these practices of risk mitigation and of pooling resources and transparency and so on, where collaborations coming from 110 nationalities are actually working on a facility that takes $1.2 billion to operate per year. And I must say that, yes, there are challenges, but there is a lot of hope as well in which we work. And year by year, these kind of, let's say, processes are developed. And I entered into, let's say, the management space about 10 years ago. And I have seen how there are checks and balances in place where we cannot risk being wrong because, you know, we are answerable to the taxpayer. So every dollar that is spent at CERN, actually, there has been a study, brings back $3.75 to the country, whichever country is investing at CERN. 70% of our students go to industries. Artificial intelligence is actually being used in our experiments and then packages being taken up because, you know, we work on pattern recognition for our studies, our Higgs boson and the dark matter particles that we are going to discover soon.
And I mean, you were the first Indian scientist at CERN. Where do you see India's role in this international or global science discourse?
I'm very happy to say that India has passed the cusp of progress in terms of science and the wherewithal within the country, expertise within the country, whether it's particle physics or quantum or nanoscience or material science and so on. Now it's the time for leadership. And that will come in due course of time as well, because the way large experiments in which I have been involved, look at India in terms of policies. Very, very favorable policies have been come out from the Niti Aayog. There has been the science technology innovation policy that has come out as well, which is very much empowering for the youth. And there are ICERs, these are institutions of excellence for education and research. These are institutions of national importance where science is the thrust. And that's where we move a little bit away from the technology part of it. So technology is very important. India is marching ahead in technology. We are a warehouse of talent. You know, the whole world wants to engage with us in India, whether it is Apple or Samsung, as we heard in the morning, and many, many other, let's say, offshoring coming from other countries. For the innovation now, if I may just take 30 seconds on that, we are all from Switzerland here for some reason, and Switzerland has something very special. The population is 8.5 million, and it leads the world's ranking in innovation index. Every single year, year after year, I'm seeing for the last several years that the innovation index, there are nearly 1,000 patents that are filed for every 1 million inhabitants. So there's something special in the ecosystem and in the infrastructures and so on. So my dream really is that India can be facilitated in a lot of handshaking, a lot of MOUs that are happening within these big institutions in our country. And I'm very optimistic for India.
Absolutely, so are we. Building on, of course, international collaboration and coming closer together. When it comes to science, it's of course extremely important that there's a certain, let's say, science or scientific literacy amongst policymakers, that scientists engage more with policymakers, that policymakers engage with scientists. Those bridges need to be built. Maybe I'll ask Philippa about this, and because also you work at the WHO. I mean, how do you think, or what needs to be done in order to ensure those conversations happen maybe at a more prominent rate that they are at the moment?
I think you've got to bring the right people together. And you've got to make sure you do that from the global north to the global south, across the disciplines, across the institutions. And it's really dialogues like this that start that process, get the attention, and you build from there, I think. Because what science shows in so many ways is that when you have a common language, it doesn't matter where you come from, what background you have, you share something. And I think that's one of the central messages that comes out of science.
Absolutely. And James, when we recently spoke, you talked about a scientific mindset and how bringing a scientific mindset to the discussion is very important. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yeah, I guess, so we talked about this quite a bit at the session that I did with the fellows a couple of days as well, days ago and too. I mean, for me, it's just important to keep in mind that, science is, what is science? Science is a way of asking and answering questions about the world that allows us to arrive at robust, reliable, repeatable conclusions about the world. Now, as a result of that, again, science is not a list of facts, as you know, it does, of course, it's about truth creation and knowledge creation, but it's a process. It's a process that, it's that process that we have. And it's simultaneously extremely unique and also not at all unique. What I mean by that is the following. It's not at all unique because it's just the way that humans have naturally developed over the years, centuries, to decrease to negligible the human capacity for delusion. Humans are fantastic at fooling ourselves. We love to see patterns when there's nothing there. We like to make up explanations for things that have no basis in reality. We're really good at this. But if you want to arrive at some kind of robust, reliable, repeatable conclusion about the world, you need some other method that reduces that tendency to negligible. And that's really what science is. So in that sense, it's sort of like the natural way that this has happened to manage the fallibility of humans. But simultaneously, it's extremely unique because it's the only one we have that's good. Like there has no competitors. Maybe people would disagree with me, but basically that's it. So as a result of that, you can think of it as a set of tools or a tool. It can be used for good or for bad. And if that's the case, we need to understand what science is. We need to have a scientific mindset. I see our bouncer over there. We have a scientific mindset that we need to bring to everything, but that's not enough, right? We need to be able to have a strong moral and ethical foundation for society upon which we can use science, make sure that we're shepherding it, we're being good stewards for science in the world.
Absolutely. And now, since this is an exclusively Swiss panel, and I've already been told that our time is up, we need to make sure that we stick to the timing. But that very much wraps it up. Scientific mindset is important. So the big question of will science secure or upend, I believe if we all ensure that we dedicate this to a positive scientific mindset, the future looks bright. Thank you, everyone.